In the packet that you got in the bag that you got, there's a USB drive that's supposed to have all the PowerPoints on them, so you'll have this PowerPoint.
Oh.
But one of the handouts is the PowerPoint, so you can take notes if you'd like to. And then another handout just comes from a blog that I write. And you see on the date, it's like 7 years ago that I wrote that particular blog, but I think it had something to say today. My name is Kevin, and that's all you need to call me is Kevin. My email is in blue. I don't know why I did that, but it's kevin@franklincommunitychurch.org. If you're interested in contacting me, then you have my phone number there as well. I pastor a church in Franklin, Tennessee. You know, the wealthiest county in Tennessee where there's no homeless people, right? Well, you're wrong. There are homeless people, and God has a sense of humor. So I pastor a low-income church in a high-income city, and we work with people who are on the margins, and have emergency shelters that we operate, group homes, community centers, and so forth. And my background is, of course, pastoring. I've been a pastor for 30 years. I know I don't look that old, but I've been a pastor for 30 years. For 14 of those years, I taught sociology at Nashville State Community College in Nashville. And really, when I started teaching sociology is when God started doing a work on my life about how I had been misreading Scripture and opening up my eyes to some things that I had just not wanted to pay a lot of attention to. That now has put me on this path where, at least in our community, for good or bad, I'm known as the activist. I had a meeting with the city last week, and the city leaders about an issue that's coming up. And when I walked into the room, one of the main guys from the city stood up and said, "How you doing, troublemaker?" And I was like, "Well, that's not the reputation I wanted to have, but I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?" And but anyway, and so I'm glad to be here, and we're glad that I was asked to talk about these core beliefs. But I think the place to start is with my own core beliefs. Because when I taught sociology at a secular college, I would tell them the first day of class that I'm a pastor, and I would tell them a little bit about myself. And I would say that not so they would have to agree with me. I said, you don't have to agree with me, because I had tons of students from all walks of life at Nashville State, a high number of Muslim students who I grew to love and learn to appreciate what they believe, especially when it comes to their generosity and their care for the community. But I would tell them that up front, just so that way, if I say something, you'll know where I'm coming from. All right? You don't have to agree with it, but you'll know where I'm coming from. And so I assume that there could be some people in this room who go to church, they're Christians, but there could be synagogues, there could be Muslims or Buddhists or atheists or whatever. I want to be respectful for what everybody believes, but just so you'll know where I'm coming from, it is this particular worldview of being a follower of Jesus Christ. And so here is basically my core beliefs, and to me it has to do with what we're talking about, which is why I want to share it. This is the words from Jesus when he went into his hometown synagogue. And this is really the announcement of his ministry. This is what he was called to do. And he opened up Isaiah, and so this is a passage from Isaiah that he was reading from that had to do with what the Messiah was going to do. So this is Jesus' job description right here. And notice what he said. This is what he is supposed to be doing. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." If the gospel is not good news to the poor, it's not good news for anybody. You see, and so the poor should be our target audience. As a church, that's who we are to be reaching. And the word poor there does not mean poor in spirit. It means to be poor because of the systems that are around you that keep you in poverty. That's what the word means. And so he says, "I've come to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners." This is about poverty, but poverty and the mass industrial prison complex go hand in hand, do they not? You go to prison, you got out of prison, you're set up for poverty the rest of your life. And Jesus said that we are to go into the prison and set the captives free. All right? So he sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoner and recovery of sight for the blind and health care. Set the oppressed free, mental health care. And proclaim of the years the year of the Lord's favor. So that passage, that verse means, is really where I'm coming from at this stage in my life. And so just a few of my core beliefs. First, I think that my mission as a follower of Jesus should be the same as Jesus' mission. And so if that was his mission, that should be my mission. If I'm his disciple, if I'm a follower of him. And so my mission should be that. So that's where we're coming from when we're talking about poverty. I believe this with all my heart. God's people living out kingdom of God principles is a solution to all of our social problems. If the church would be the church, we would have no social problems, or we would be able to address the social problem. I am thankful for the government. Our church gets a grant from the government. I will spend Caesar's money as quickly as I will anybody else's money. But the primary responsibility for these issues that we face are at the feet of the church. Is my conviction. That's what I believe. And so this faith-based track is incredibly important to me. And so when we would live out, but what are those principles? Well, if you go back to that passage of Scripture very, very quickly, here's what I mean by these kingdom principles. First, we are to provide hope and a future for those who think they have no hope or future. And that's the idea of preaching the good news to the poor. Providing hope for a future. Things can get better. Hope for a future. All right, that's the kingdom principle. The second one is justice in the form of freedom and liberty. Freedom for the prisoner. And that's not what we're here today about, but there is a correlation between mass incarceration and poverty and homelessness. So justice, did you know that when you're let go out of a county jail, you've got 30 minutes to get off the property or you will be rearrested? Did you know that? So if you have nowhere to go, well, what are you going to do? Well, in Franklin, they walk down to a Marathon gas station and call me. I don't know how they figure that out, but that's what they do. Because if they stay on the property, they will get rearrested. All right? So you're set up for failure, really, the way our mass incarceration system works. But we are to provide freedom for the prisoner, affordable and attainable health care for all, especially the most marginalized, sight for the blind. Jesus never asked for a copay before he healed anybody. Right? We're to be doing what Jesus did. Okay? And so and of course, there's a correlation between poverty and health. The health could send you into poverty, but if you're in poverty, you have lower health care available. You eat worse types of food. The average person in poverty lives, I think it's around 10 or 12 years less than a person who's not in poverty. Lifespan. So these are real issues, all right? And then that health care should also include mental illness. In my experience, I think that pretty much 100% of people who are homeless have some form of mental illness one way or another. They may not have had it before they became homeless, but they get it, PTSD, just fear, insecurity, voices. We do a bad job in this country when it comes to mental health care. A horrible job when it comes to mental health care. And so if the church would live out those principles, I don't mean to get on the churches, but look at those principles and then look at most of the programs in most churches. They don't line up with those with those principles. But so those are the kingdom principles, and then of course future salvation. That's proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's the idea. That's the last part of Jesus' words. And so my core beliefs: I'm to be doing what Jesus did. If we would live out God's principles, we would solve most of our problems. The kingdom of God is both now and not yet. This is where we come in as agencies and even as followers of Christ when we're going about trying to house homeless people, trying to take care of people who are struggling with addictions and health and all those kind of things. We are bringing the reality of the kingdom of God into that present situation. It's a snapshot of the kingdom that will be fulfilled when Christ returns. But in the meantime, the kingdom is now and not yet. What you are doing, listen to me, you may not even be a Christian, but what you are doing is kingdom work. Whether you realize it or not. It is kingdom work to be out there in the trenches and helping people who are struggling with issues in poverty and homelessness, mass incarceration, mental illness, those kind of things. That is kingdom work. It's also messy work, which is why too many times churches shy away from it, because it's just messy. It's not clean. It's not tidy. Can I get an amen? You're in that. It's there. All right? And so these are just my core beliefs. And four, poverty and homelessness are signs of systemic breakdowns in society. Let's see. You get a chance to go back and read Deuteronomy chapter 15. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, God says to the children of Israel, when you come into the promised land, there should be no poverty, no poor among you. So if there is poor among us, it's a breakdown of the system somewhere. What's interesting is in that passage, that's also the passage Jesus quoted when he said, the poor will always be with you. And so at the beginning of chapter 15, God said, the poor should not even be among you. And then at the end of it, he says, but they're going to always be with you. But treat them as your brothers. Be open-handed, generous. Give to them whatever it is that they need. You see? And so really, poverty is about how do we respond to it more than the person who's in poverty themselves. But it's poverty and homelessness. Listen, here's what I've been telling the churches that listen to me in Franklin, but now I'm trying to spread it around. We've got an affordable housing crisis in Middle Tennessee, do we not?
Yes.
The average one-bedroom apartment in my city is $1,200 a month. One bedroom. The median price home in my city is close to $600,000. My city talks about affordable housing, and they're talking about homes between $250,000 and $325,000. Affordable housing. It's a breakdown of our system. But here's where the church would come involved. If every church in Middle Tennessee would just subsidize one house rental or one apartment rental, just subsidize one. How many churches are in this area?
One on every block.
In town, we would have more housing units available to us than the government does. We could solve the problem. And for $1,200 a month. It's simple. We just don't have the will to do it. You see. But it's a simple solution. And so that's why it's a breakdown of the system of our society. And so we have the means and the know-how to do what is right. But what we are lacking is the courage and the conviction to do what is right. We know how to fix this problem. But it's just the conviction, the courage to do it. So that's just kind of where I'm coming from. And so what causes poverty? What causes poverty? Well, first, and this definition comes from the classic book by Dr. Ruby Payne, but to me it's the best definition of poverty because it's all-encompassing. It's a holistic approach to it. Poverty is a lack of basic resources. Poverty is a lack of basic resources that leads to insecurity about the future. I'm worried about where my next meal is going to come from. I'm worried about what's going to happen if I get sick and I don't have adequate health care. I'm worried about my retirement. I'm worried about my children's education. So you have this lack of resources and it causes insecurity about the future. That's poverty. There are four types of poverty. First, the situational poverty. This is in one of the handouts that I gave, just kind of a summary of each one. The one on with the blog, definitions of poverty. Situational poverty is you're poor because of a situation. So you had a job, but then maybe the economy turned around. You went into, or you have a health care problem, or there was some type of traumatic event that you weren't in poverty. Your situation changed. Now you are in poverty. Situational poverty is real. The good news is situational poverty can usually be overcome because you knew what it was like not to live in poverty. So when you go into poverty, you can kind of work your way out of it and the situation will change. And then what aggravates me sometimes is the people in situational poverty that we hold up as the examples, and because they got themselves out of that situation, we think anybody can do it. Well, no, there's situational poverty. It's the situation. Once that situation was rectified, they were able to get themselves out of poverty, maybe with a little bit of help some right direction, some retraining. They got themselves out of it. Situational poverty. A more detrimental type of poverty is generational poverty. This is where a family has been in poverty for generations. And so it's become part of their culture as a family. And the longer, the more generations a family has been in poverty, the more difficult it is to come out of it. I was talking to a guy in jail one day, and he was a gang member, been involved in all kinds of stuff, in and out of jail, and he was about to be released, and he was like Kevin, Pastor Kevin, I want to do different this time. I want to be better. I want to change. I want to be different. But then he said this, I just don't know what different is. This is all I've ever known. This is all my family has ever known. My dad was incarcerated. My brothers are incarcerated. My grandfather was incarcerated. And I want to do better, but I don't know what better is. That's generational poverty. You see. Generational poverty. All right? Third type of poverty is relative poverty. That's you're poor in relation to everyone else around you. You know, you're driving an old beat-up car, and all your friends have brand new cars. Well, you got a car, but it's just relative. You're having to rent, and your friends own a house. Relative, you're poor in relation to the other people around you. You see, now that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's just relative poverty. If you look at the rest of the world, you've got it pretty good. That doesn't mean that your poverty doesn't hurt. I mean, if I got one broken leg, if you show me somebody who's got two broken legs, that don't make me feel any better. Okay, I'm not as bad, but I still got a broken leg. So it's still poverty. It's still real, and it still hurts, and it's still difficult, but it's relative. And then you have absolute poverty, which is life-threatening. Life-threatening. You ever seen on television kids from third world countries whose stomachs are bloated? Okay? But then you see kids in poverty in the United States whose stomachs are bloated. What's the difference? One, because they're eating the wrong foods, because they're in poverty, and it costs a lot of money to eat healthy. But that's relative poverty. The other is they don't have anything to eat, and they're going to die of malnutrition. Both is poverty. But one's relative, one is absolute. And absolute poverty is life-threatening. You're going to die if you don't get something to eat or something to drink, if you don't have shelter. It's absolute. It's life-threatening. And we have all four poverties in the United States. I used to say we had very little absolute poverty in the United States, but that's not true anymore. You can go to the Appalachian Mountains. You can go to Indian reservations, and you can see absolute poverty, where people are dying because they don't have anything to eat. They have inadequate health care. They have inadequate shelter. And so all four types of poverty we see in the United States. And so that's just, now the reason that this is important is because you got to understand the definition so that you know what you're dealing with. If somebody comes into me who they live in a nice part of town, a nice house, but they've lost their job and now they're declaring bankruptcy because they've gotten themselves in over their heads financially, and it's because of a change in economics. I want to look at that person. Okay, now what are the resources that he needs? Well, I may need to get him into this networking place. I can put him into groups of people who can help him network and maybe help pay his rent or his mortgage or whatever for a month or two, because there's a really, really good chance they're going to get back up on their feet. Does that make sense? But if somebody comes to me and it's generational poverty, and it's a more extreme type of poverty, the resources that I give that person, the help that I give that person are going to be totally different. So I got to know what the reason is that you're in poverty. So I know how to best help in that. So I don't help when it hurts. How's the best way to help in this particular situation with this particular person and their particular need. And unless I understand the complications or the complexity of poverty as a whole, I don't even know where to begin from that. And so it's helpful just to know, to me, just to know those definitions, which is what that says. Those definitions help me serve the person. And so poverty is a lack of basic resources that leads to insecurity about the future. In her classic book, A Framework for Understanding Poverty, Dr. Ruby Payne said there's 8. You've probably heard this before. If you've been in social work any amount of time, you've heard this. So this is just a reminder for a lot of you. But 8 basic resources. And the more resources that we lack, the deeper in poverty we are and the harder it is to get out of. 8 basic resources that she says that can lead to an insecure future. First is financial. And what I like what she says about that is she makes this statement. A lack of financial resources is the least important thing that keeps a person in poverty. It's the least important. If giving people more money would get them out of poverty, we would have solved that a long time ago. Our church operates a group home for men, 8 men. Most of them are my age and older. Most of them have been homeless at one time or another, and now they live in our group home. And they pay a small, meager fee to live there. And they don't pay if they don't have a job, and then we help them get a job, and then they can pay, they pay this fee. It's $175 a month, and that's pretty much your room and your board. Now you're in a group home, you're living with 7 other guys. But now here's the thing: the budget for that group home cost our church $100,000 a year to take care of 8 guys. I'm thinking, goodness, what is that a person? That's 10,000, what, 11,000, right? 12,000 a person. Yeah. So if it was just finances, we could solve this problem. But that's the least important. Now, if you don't have money, it's hard to do anything if you don't have money. And so higher employment, raising the minimum wage, those kind of things can help. But you know how it works. If a person doesn't know how to manage $10 and they don't know how to manage $100, and so money is the least important resource that can help get a person out of poverty. Right? What she says is the most important resource is emotional. If you lack emotional resources, on the handout you can see just quickly what that means is this is being able to choose and control emotional responses, particularly in negative situations. What do you do when things get tough? Do you run back to an addiction that you have? Do you go inside and just check out and quit? What do? You see, so that not being able to handle things emotionally can cause people to stay in poverty until they learn the tools necessary to be able to handle things emotionally. Mental resources. This is having the mental abilities to and acquired skills. If you don't know how to read or write, nowadays computers. Just that mental ability to be able to handle things. And one of the guys in our group home cannot read or write. And so that's a resource that he lacks that becomes difficult in trying to operate in our society. You see, so there's a lack of mental resources. I love the fact that she does mention spiritual resources. Spiritual resources is just believing that you have a divine purpose and guidance. You have hope, in other words. And once you take hope away, then why keep going? There's a guy in my community. This is a very, very sad story, so bear with me. But he was living in housing. He got in a fight with his wife. He had 2 jobs. Went to jail for about 9 months. Lost his jobs. Lost his wife. When he got out of jail, and he was in his 60s, and so trying to find another job at that age is difficult. When he got out of jail, even if his wife wanted to take him back, he couldn't because of the way government housing works, right? You lose your housing benefits. He knew about my group home. He called me, came by and saw me and said, "Hey, I need a place to stay. What do you have?" And I was like, "Man, we're full right now. I'll see what I can do, but our group home is full." Okay. A week later, I got a phone call 6 o'clock in the morning from the chief of police. She asked me if I was over in the community. I said no. She said, "Well, you need to get over there. There's a guy, I think you know him, told me his name. He is hanging from a tree." Killed himself. because I didn't have room for him. You know, what happened? He didn't have the emotional support, the mental support that he needed to try to overcome that situation. Got another guy in my group home who the newspaper came, or the television came and talked to us, and this guy had been living in the home for a little while, and I did not know this story. And she looked at this guy and said, "What does living here mean to you?" And he said, "Well, Pastor Kevin saved my life." She said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "I've been after Pastor Kevin for a year or more to let me come live in the house, and he kept telling me when there's room that he would let me come in, but there wasn't room. And so I went to him one more time and said, 'You got room in your house?' I said, and he said, 'Yes.' I moved into the house that day. I had already made up in my mind when I go to Pastor Kevin and ask if I can come in the house, if he says no, I was going to kill myself that day." And I was like, "What?" We need more group homes, by the way. That's the whole thing. We need more housing for people, because when they give up hope, man alive, there's nothing else to do. And so this spiritual aspect gives you hope. God cares about you. He loves you. He's there for you. He does see what you're going through. Don't give up hope. Keep hope alive. Physical resources. This is just having the physical health and mobility. You know, a person is disabled, so they're automatically limited in what jobs they can get. Transportation, is that not the biggest issue? I can get a job, but I just got out of jail. My driver's license is held up in court until I pay some fines. I don't have transportation. This person's offering me a job making $15 an hour, but it's on the other side of town. I live in Lebanon, and if I can get to Nashville, it's $20 an hour, but I don't have. So there's physical limitations. You see, lack of resources, just that physical, be it physical, or just mobility. Support systems, this is so huge. Support systems, where do you go to when you run into trouble? There's been a few times in my life, I hate to admit, but things were tight, not sure how I was going to pay the next bill, student loan, and like, "Hey, Dad, can you help?" Yeah, how much, son? That's the support system. I'm in a bind. I don't know what to do. Can I get some help? You see. But if you don't have that support system, what happens when you get yourself in trouble? I want to go to work, but I got a child. I can't afford child care, and I don't have a grandparent, or in my daughter's situation, my father-in-law, and so my daughter's and her husband's great-grandchild, my father-in-law goes and keeps. Well, not everybody has that support, right? So that lack of simple support system is if you don't have that, then that keeps you even more down. Relationships and role models, and I mentioned that with the guy in jail. I don't have that role model. I don't know what to do. There's a lady in my town who started a school called New Hope Academy, and part of the mission was to help underserved kids. And she says one of the things that caused her to start this school, she was in community with government housing, and she was talking to a young boy and asking the young boy, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And he said, "I want to be a professional football player." And she said, "Well, what if that doesn't work? What do you want to do?" "I guess I'll be a professional basketball player." "Well, that doesn't work. What do you want to do?" "I guess I'll be a rapper." "If that doesn't work, what do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I guess I'll work at McDonald's." You see, no role model in between of an electrician, a plumber, a painter. No, his role models were television and fast food. No other role model. You see, role models. I've talked with guys who, they learned the trade from their dad. The problem is their dad was a drug dealer or was in sex trafficking, and they learned that trade from them when they were children. No role model. I want to do better, but I don't know what. All right. So that no relationships or role models. And then this could be a whole seminar, and I love this part. But the hidden rules, just not knowing the hidden rules. There's a difference. If you're in the upper class, you live by a different set of rules. If you're in the middle class, it's a different set of rules or culture. If you're in the lower class, it's a different set of rules. And so if you're in the lower class, you may not know the rules of what it means to live in the middle class or the upper class, the hidden rules. Or if you're in the middle class, you don't understand the hidden rules of poverty. Where do you go when you need help? You see, if you're in the middle class, you may not know where to go to get help with your rent. And so it's a whole culture of middle class, upper class, and lower class. And when you move from one culture to the next, you don't know those hidden rules, and then it can push you back down into the culture from which I used to ask this question in my sociology class. Which is easier, for somebody in the upper class to become lower class, or for somebody in the lower class to become upper class? Which is easier? To go up. Most people say, well, it's probably easier it's easier to go from upper class to lower class, because you might lose everything. And I said, no, it's the exact opposite, because if you're in the upper class, if you're in the upper class, there are so many safety nets around you, and it would embarrass the family name if you fell into poverty. There ain't no way you're falling into poverty. It's just not going to happen. You see, and if it did, you wouldn't know how to survive. But and most people, the vast majority of people, even though we live in a society that says you can have upper mobility, most people spend their entire lives in the class into which they were born. Do you know that? Most people. Upper mobility is not as widespread as we like to think. But anyway, so the knowledge of hidden rules. All right? All right. Any questions? I'll stop right there. I can get talking and forget to stop. I'm a preacher. Very rarely on Sunday mornings do you stop mid-sermon and say, anybody got a question? This one? Well, there's two. There's PowerPoint too. Anybody got an extra copy? Who handed those out? They're already out? They're already out. All right, any other? I like that question. I can answer that.
Well, I have some kind of
All right.
I used to go out to the county jail and do ritual work, and like you said, role model, nobody you look up to, keep doing the same thing, but they all was on both license.
Yeah.
I mean, why did you know what you do when you know you're supposed to drive?
Because you got to get to work. Yeah, or get it, but either way, you got to do something. I've met guys in jail who have to. The most I ever met was a guy who said that it would cost him $50,000 in fines to get his driver's license back. Now, there's help with that. I mean, you can go and you can petition the courts and you can get that almost down to nothing or greatly reduced. But you got to know how, and you still have to pay a lawyer. So it still may cost you $1,000, which, if you're poor, $50,000, $1,000, it don't really matter. One's as bad as the other. Yeah. But transportation is a huge, huge thing that prevents people in poverty from being able to work, being able to get back on their feet. All right. So, what are the root issues that homeless face? This is one of the questions that was on the sheet that I was given. So, and so I was thinking about this. What are some of the root issues? Well, one, as I mentioned, is insecurity. Insecuritity. Just not know this is where people debate whether or not housing first works and all that. But one of the things that does make sense to me about housing first is if you take the fear away of where am I going to sleep tonight. Man alive, that means the next day you had a good night's rest. You're able to face the day a little bit different. But that insecurity, I don't know what I'm going to do tonight. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. That can cause you. I have not. I'm not making excuses, but I've talked to people that said, they've told Pastor, I know I shouldn't do this, but the only way at night, I'm so afraid at night. The only way at night I can get any sleep is self-medication, basically. That's the only way I get any rest. So how are you going to tell that person, get off alcohol and then I'll help you? You see, no, let's get that person housed, and then maybe we can start dealing with some of those other issues, because insecurity is, and when there's children involved, it's just really, really traumatic. Insecurity, that's an issue they face. Fear, that goes hand in hand. Fear. For years, our church has done emergency shelter in Franklin, and it's been mainly for men, and it's been mainly for the winter months when it gets really cold. And these are guys on the streets. Most of them have addiction problems. But some things have happened, and some incredible stories I wish I could go into. But a large church stepped up wanting to help us, because our church is small. Which, by the way, I meant when the other guy was you guys who run agencies, do not overlook the small churches. Okay, call them. Build a relationship with that pastor, because you know what? If you can become friends with that pastor in that small churches don't have red tape. So you need $100 to help somebody with rent. You call that mega church, you got to go through 5 committees and 4 boards. But you call that small church pastor who has a heart for what you're doing, you need we can do that. I can do that right now. You do not. I'm extremely active in my community, and there's one agency in town who has a staff position called this liaison to churches. Has never contacted me, and I was on the board of that organization for a while. Never contacted me about anything. Anyway, so take that. If you're calling that big church. There's a lady in my town who wanted to start a nonprofit for reading during the summer. She's a great teacher, and her idea was, I want to approach 20 churches. If 20 churches would give me $2,000, that's $40,000 seed money that I can start my nonprofit. The Predators gave her a lot of money to start the nonprofit. She sent letters to the 20 large churches in our county. No one even acknowledged she got the letter. And she called me, and for 3 or 4 years in a row, we gave her $2,000, which is a lot of money for us. So do not overlook that small church pastor. They're the ones who can help you. All right? And they probably know the people you're serving. You see. And so anyway, so take that for what it's. But anyway, fear. So fear can, that's something they face. Just where am I going to get my next meal? What am I going to do? Oh, where I was going with that is because of the things that happened, we started emergency shelter for the summer. Okay? And we started it August 1 for different reasons. And so since August 1, we have done 21 nights of emergency shelter. The rule of thumb is if it's 90 and above or 32 and below. And so all this week we'll have emergency shelter. And I've been telling people the need is for men, because that's, how come you don't have anything for women? Well, because it's for men. Well, the church that we meet at, they can do men, women, and children. It's a great location, great facilities. And to my surprise, we have had far more women come to the shelter than men. And I'm talking to them, and they've been living in fear, hiding in the backs of buildings in their cars, afraid to come public. And what they tell me is there's far more out there than what's coming to our shelter because they're afraid to come. That guy who likes his alcohol or drugs, he's out there in public. But that lady is in her car in the back somewhere where nobody can see her. Fear. All right? So fear keeps them from coming. Anxiety. This is all. You can see how this all feeds into itself. Now, I'm afraid. I don't have any security. Anxiety, and of course that can lead to health problems, both physical and mental health problems. And then where do they go? They don't have health insurance. And so they face that. And then their kids get sick. Their kids could probably get help because of kin care, but they don't know that, or they're afraid, and just all. So the health problem, right? I mean, people who are homeless are not in good health, physically or mentally. You see, all right? And so they face that ostracization. People don't want to be around them. you're seeing those YouTube videos or different things where a person dresses up and acts like they're homeless, and they walk into a church just to see how the church will respond, right? The place that should be the most welcoming, right? Yeah. Or they can't, they go and they'll stay in Kroger for a while, but then eventually they're asked to leave Kroger. If they don't leave, then they trespassing. Then they'll go to the library for a while, but if they look like they're homeless, after a while, the library will ask them to
I've noticed
to leave.
McDonald's, like every McDonald's now has signs that say 20-minute limit.
20-minute limit?
Inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the park benches have bumps and things on them so nobody can sleep on them. Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Or you, in public spaces now, you rarely see a long park bench. Even if they're long, about every 2 or 3 feet, they have an armrest. It's all to keep homeless people from sleeping on them. You see, ostracization. Where do they go? What do they do with their time? One of the things that burdens me, and one of the biggest problems with the emergency shelter. I mean, our goal is a permanent shelter in Franklin, but one of the problems with that is the emergency shelter. The next day, see you later. We'll be here tonight. Come back. What do they do? During the day, where if it was a holistic approach, we could do more from that. But just that and then their children, if they go to school and somebody finds out they're homeless, just that it just feeds on it. So you get this. You got a job and your employer finds out you're homeless, what happens? You get fired. Did you know that? You will lose your job because we're in a right to work state, so you can get fired for anything. They won't tell you that's why but that's why you got fired. You can't come to work looking like you're homeless. You don't smell too great, and your hair is unkempt, and you've had the same clothes on for a week. Our customers deserve better than that. You see. So this is ostracization, loneliness. And so they're lonely. Their only companion is a pet. And then the shelter says they can't bring their pets with them. I've made it clear to my city as we're working toward once we get a permanent location, it will be pet friendly. It is cruel to tell somebody they cannot come in when it's 10 degrees outside because they have a dog or a cat or a bird. Are you serious? You may not be an animal. I would stay with my dog. And so they're lonely, and then the one creature they have that loves them back, we tell them they can't have with them. And so that loneliness, and then if all that is into play, then it's a sense of hopelessness. Why even keep trying? I can't, no one has room for me. And then hopelessness can lead to suicide. In my county, Williamson County has the second highest suicide rate in the state of Tennessee. Shelby County is number 1, Williamson County is number 2. That's not based on per capita, that's actual number of suicides. Second highest suicide rate in the state. Yes. Yeah. Memphis is number 1, Shelby County, and then Williamson County. All right. So how does homelessness affect the family and the community? Another question. Well, here's just, it kind of feeds into itself. There is a sense of shame. There's shame. If people know I'm homeless, they're going to treat me differently. Fear. What's going to happen? A big fear if the homeless person is an immigrant. If I go to that shelter, they're going to turn me in, and ICE is going to come get me, and I'm going to be deported. So, fear. Being othered, that's them. That's what I mean by that. They're othered. Don't be careful. Don't be around those people. There's fear. socialization. In other words, they get used to being in poverty. There's a guy on the streets in Franklin who's a really, really, really bad alcoholic. He's a good friend of mine. I help him as often as I can. But he grew up in Franklin. This winter will be his 13th or 14th winter living on the streets in Franklin. And if you see him, he looks like he's homeless. Now, most people who are homeless, you don't know they're homeless, right? I mean, truly. But he looks like he's homeless. And he's told me before, this is part of socialization, he does that on purpose so people will help him. If he doesn't look like he's homeless, if he shaved his beard and cut his hair and took a shower, people wouldn't help him. But if he looks like he's homeless, that's socialization. I got to act this way. I got to take on this persona so I can survive, basically. All right, so socialization. That's how we learn to live in our culture. Homeless people have incredible coping skills to a certain degree, and they have incredible survival skills. There's a guy in Franklin who lives in his car. He's lived in his car for 8 years right now, and he doesn't want to come in. He's got PTSD real bad. He was an Army photographer in the Vietnam War, and he told me he was one of the first ones that would come in and have to photograph the battle after it was over. So you can just imagine what he's seen. He's been sober for about 12 years, homeless for 8 years. I've gone to his car. The coldest was like late at night. It was about 5 or 6 degrees, and I knock on his window. You want to come in? We got shelter tonight. You want to come in? He said, no, I'm fine, Pastor. I'm fine. I got plenty. And I said, but it's cold out here. And he told me this. He said, and this is when I started thinking we got to do something this summer, because he told me, he said, the winter is easier on me than the summer. He said, why is that? Then he kind of laughed. He said, well, my food stays fresher longer. My car's a refrigerator, so I can get fruit and it stays good. In the summer, it doesn't last very long. And I thought, I would have never thought of that. So no, Pastor, I'm fine. I like the winter better than the summer. He doesn't come in the summer either, but that's socialization. They've learned how to survive. And then there's education opportunities. The only people in my county who keep up with homeless are the school systems. We're trying to now through HMIS keep up with it. But in Williamson County, this is roughly speaking, the Williamson County Schools report it's around 230 some odd children who are homeless, and of course a child is never homeless by themselves, right? So there's at least one adult there. In the county schools, we have Franklin Special School District, we have 2 public schools, and then in the Franklin Special School District, which is just the city limits of Franklin, it's right at 200, it's like 180, 190 students. And so you're talking, 350 to 400 students in Williamson County schools that are homeless from that. And of course, if you're homeless, then you're also you're going to move around a lot. So you're going to be at this school for a few weeks, and this school for a few weeks, and this school over here. As your family moves and migrates, and so there's just education becomes very, very difficult from that. And how do you do your homework? You don't have internet and all of that. I made a big stink one year in National State when they started telling us to put more and more of our work online. And I had to go to them and tell them, you don't understand what you're asking. There's a lot of my students who do not have internet at their house. How are they going to do their homework at night? You see, a lot of that's been solved. It's more and more manageable, but there still are people. We have internet in our community center, and kids will come do their homework there because they don't have their internet at their house. And they come, and then they also come and sit outside our community center and listen to music on through the internet as well, because they don't have it in their house. But so just educational opportunities. And then, of course, health. I mentioned that before. Health. You're in bad health. You don't have health care. And if you did get medicine, you can't afford it. Health. And so health becomes a real issue. And so a person in poverty, life expectancy is a lot shorter than a person who's not in poverty. So those are issues that affect the family and the community. And, of course, also with the community, we just had this recently happen in Franklin. A lady staying in our shelter, Department of Children's Services came and removed the child because she's homeless. Now, I know the Department of Children's Services, I know it's more than just that, but that was at least one of the reasons. And so now you live in this fear. The big reason was because she hadn't sent her child to school. So the truancy issue was the biggest reason. But you can see how that just lack of education, I want to keep moving around because they're looking for me, because they're going to take their child away from me because I have mental issues, or or truancy or whatever it may be. And so it compounds. Now, the only way you get to know all this is in proximity, living and talking with people who are going through it. You don't get this stuff from a textbook. All right, it's in proximity to the people who are struggling with it is really how you learn the realities of what it is that they're facing. So what can we do to overcome homelessness? Well, there has to be resources, that not just financial, by the way. Has to be resources, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the role model, so mentoring. There has to be resources for that. You have to give them opportunities for education or for work or for rehab. But here's the thing. Had a guy on the streets come to me after years and said he finally wanted help. He wanted to stop. He wanted me to send him to rehab. And you guys know this. What do you do when somebody says, I want to go to rehab? He's on alcohol, so he's got to go detox first, right? If you're on drugs, you can stay off drugs 24 hours. I can get you in a rehab center. But if you got alcohol in you, got to go to detox first. So we found a detox center in Brentwood that was going to be, the average stay would be 5 or 6 nights, $800 a night. This guy's homeless. Through some connections, the detox center said, we'll do it for free, we'll scholarship him. So we took him to detox. He was in, but that's $6,000 right there, okay, because they don't have health care. And then after that, I got him into a treatment center, a 30-day program. Another, I think it was $5,000. I don't remember now. So now we're up to $11,000. At the end of the 30 days, he really needs more than 30 days. And so he needs to go into a long-term care, which was another 30 days, which was another $6,000. Right? So now we're up to, and so basically what I'm saying, this, if somebody who is homeless comes to you and says they want help with their addiction problem, if you don't have $20,000 in the bank to help them, you can't help them. You can't help them. You see. I reached out to friends and we raised all that money in a short period of time, but it was extremely difficult. And then it was like, and what's the odds of him not relapsing, right? So you spend $20,000, 100 days later he relapsed. 100 days later. I'm so happy he was sober for 100 days, the longest time he's been sober since he was a teenager. So I'm happy about that. But if he comes for help again, you think people are going to help me? It makes no sense, because we will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars helping cancer patients, and then when the cancer goes into remission, but then it comes back, we send them back again for treatment, spend some more money on them. So if we really believe that addiction is a sickness, why do we not step up and help? You see. And help them. If it goes into remission for 100 days, great. If it comes back a year from now, 20 years from now, let's start all over again and help them again. You see. But that takes resources. It takes opportunities. Look, here's the thing. And then plus, if you run into this, I'm sure as well, if you're in this field, you got this homeless person, you want to get them help. I get on the phone, I'll call 15, 20 different groups of group homes, treatment centers, Everybody is full. Right? You run into that? I can't find a bed for this person. You see. We need, it's just more and more. So opportunities, accountability. You got to hold them accountable. You got to practice tough love. So that accountability, but yet an extreme amount of grace also. But accountability. Here's what we're asking you to do. If you want to, it's got to be intentional. Intentional. You got to. Do you want to get these people out? Intentionality. Thanks to a grant that our church received since August 1, our emergency rehab has been open 21 days, and we have placed 4 families in permanent housing in that period of time. Homelessness to housing. Intentionality. Intentional. We got to do this. All right. Education. Not only educating. My partner in crime and I were talking the way over here about how do we do this? How do we educate not just the people who are homeless and poverty, but how do we educate the community about what's going on. But here's what's happened. Here's what brought up that conversation. I got a phone call yesterday from a pastor in town who had a homeless person, saw walking in the street, wanted to know what to do. And I said, well, bring them to the shelter tonight. We'll house them in the shelter. I get to the shelter. This person, they just dropped her off. And come 7 o'clock this morning, okay, what do we do now? Because the church did what they only knew to do. It's what you're talking about. They want to help. They just don't know how to help. They came and dropped this person off. And now it's 7 o'clock. We have to be out of the building, and no one knows. And so I get a phone call on the way over here this morning. What are we going to do with, what now? Where do we take? What's going on? So how do we educate people that, look, what should have happened as a church, if you saw this homeless person, that means God put them there for you. Bring them to our shelter. That's great. But come back the next morning and help this person get to whatever place that they need to get to next. Whatever it may be. Well, we don't know. Well, okay, how can we educate so we can know this is? So on the phone, it was like I gave them, 3 or 4 options of what could be done to help this person with until tonight or wherever it was that was going next. But education, you gotta learn about this, and then of course counseling. People who are homeless, man alive, there's counseling that needs to be done to help them get back on their feet, and then compassion. That's the big one, just compassion. Every person you meet has been created in the image of God. Every person. So you have to be able to look at that person in the eyes. They could be stinky, high, drunk, obviously a mental thing going on. They may be rude. They may have cussed you out. Right? They may have done all this stuff to you, but you've got to be able to look them in the eyes and to see God. The image of God reflected back. So then you have compassion. They're going to use you. They're going to abuse you. They're going to take advantage of the system. Right? They're going to run you ragged. They're going to make you mentally drained. There are going to be days when you want to quit. Unless you have compassion. To be able to see them the way Jesus sees them. As people who are lost without a shepherd. And what we say at my church is, the way you serve God who you cannot see is by serving those you can see. And so you look at that person. Mother Teresa was asked, why does she go spend so much time with the poor? You know what she said, don't you? She said that's because that's where Jesus is. He is with them. So that's where the compassion comes from that will keep you going when you don't want to go anymore. This person, man, you've helped them over and over again, and here they are again. They keep repeating the same bad mistakes. Compassion, where does it come from? Well, remember what I said at the beginning. This is where I come from. That compassion only comes from Christ. You see, He has extended you grace so you can show grace to others. He has loved you so you can love others. So that's what you do. That compassion. Don't ever get cynical. Don't ever get cynical. When you get cynical, read the Gospels again. But don't ever become cynical from that. And so this is just a question for you to take with you. How can your organization play that unique role? What is it that you do? Do you provide housing? Do you provide counseling? Do you provide help with bills? What is it that you do? What can your church do to be more intentional about helping people who truly need help, the marginalized in our society? All right, it's 11:59, so it's like church. Church is over. Let's all head to the nearest restaurant, which is just right there. in the back, right? All right, thank you.